Shall we all pray? Our Father in heaven, we want to thank you for this day. We want to thank you for your promises. Lord, your word says, for I have plans for you, plans not to harm you, but to give you hope and a future. We want to thank you for your love towards us, O God. Lord, we pray for your hand, your blessing upon this meeting. Lord, we commit Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and all the councillors and officials into your hands. We pray, even as things are discussed, we pray for your wisdom and that you'd keep us in the center of your will. Lord, we commit this borough of Basingstoke and Dean. We pray that this place will be a place which is prosperous, secured, where everyone will feel safe, and Lord, everyone is in good health. So Lord, we pray for your blessing upon this borough. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. I was delighted to attend the Basingstoke Variety Show on Saturday in aid of the Mayor's charities. It was an amazing event with talented people of all ages from the district putting on an excellent evening of entertainment. And of course, the programmes were selling, the donation buckets were rattling, and raffle tickets being bought. Charity is not just about giving money. It is so easy to put a hand in a pocket or a purse and throw a few coins, or perhaps even a note, into a bucket or a tin, and then move on, feeling that we have done our bit. And of course it does help. But it is more difficult to give up some of our time to help others. The time pressures on people, especially those with families, are high these days. There never seems to be enough time in the day for our own family and friends, never mind others. Most volunteers are of a certain age. Local volunteers are always needed for a variety of different tasks, and I know from experience that it can be a very rewarding experience, but it can also be frustrating. The most difficult way to be charitable is to keep a charitable outlook. But what does that mean? In a cultural, diverse society, the difference between the young and the elderly, between the affluent and the less well-off, and even between the north and south of our country can appear to be wide. There may be many things that people do or believe that are unfamiliar to us, and so may appear strange. But by keeping an open mind, thinking favourably of those who we may not fully understand, giving the benefit of the doubt, and acting generously, then we can keep our charitable outlook on life.
Thank you. Please sit down. Yep. Councillors, fire evacuation procedures. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of this room. Go down the back stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. To receive apologies, I have got one apology, which is from Councillor West. Councillor Gavin James.
Less controversially, apologies for Councillor Eric Dunlop.
Eric Dunlop. Yes, Councillor James.
Apologies for Councillor Colin Regan.
Lovely. Noted. Declaration of interest. First.
Mr. Mayor, I have an interest to declare in relation to the first motion, which mentions the local debt advice charity Money Lifeline. I am both a trustee and a senior advisor with Money Lifeline, but my interest is not pecuniary because I am purely a volunteer. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
I have a peculiar interest in Basingstoke Golf Club and Money Down. It's on green papers. If it's going to be discussed, I will be leaving the room otherwise. I will stay.
Thank you. Now we come to confirm the minutes held on 11th of July 2013 and 25th of July 2013. Is that agreed? Agreed. Now to receive announcement from myself, the Mayor, and the Chief Executive. I have got two announcements to make. The one is that this morning, today, I receive a number of Gurukul scholars who are studying at London School of Economics. They are Indian scholars, and they were here to really find out about local government. And Councillor Jayawardena hosted them, as well as myself in my parlor, and then he gave them a tour, etc. So that was very welcome indeed. And my second announcement is with regards to Basingstoke Live. Basingstoke Live took place over the weekend of 13th and 14th July this year in the War Memorial Park. The event was very successful, helped by the good weather, with over 36,000 people passing through the gates. The event featured over 100 of our Basingstoke's top acts, alongside international headliners playing across 5 stages, together with a whole host of workshops, dance, and creative activities. Many music genres were catered for, including rock, metal, indie, punk, ska, hip-hop, drum and bass, reggae, and funk. The music is programmed by the Basingstoke Live Forum, made up of local people passionate about music, working alongside the council, giving a great deal of their time for free. The council's events team organizes the event and has worked very closely with the police, who are here, crowd management company, who are here, and community safety patrol officers, who are also here, to overcome the challenges from previous years and ensure that the event was safe and that everyone enjoyed the weekend without spoiling the atmosphere. On behalf of the council, I'd like to express our thanks to the team responsible for the organization, success, and safety of the event. They are Inspector Dave Winter, Basingstoke Police, Sergeant Ali McShay, Basingstoke Police, Marty Jones, MJ Events, Crowd Management, Luke Chatterton, Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council Event Officer, Andy Grove, Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council Events Manager. I'd say thank you, and I'm very proud of how things went. Thank you very much. Now, Chief Executive.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have 3 relatively brief announcements. I had no prior knowledge of charity being the theme of the thought of the day, but coincidentally I was going to raise a couple of charitable matters. The first one relates to Basingstoke Food Bank. Members may be aware that the food bank has been operating for about a year and has so far supplied food to over 2,000 people in our borough. Following a request from Councillor Parker, the council officers have promoted the food bank to local businesses via our borough business partnership. In addition, the staff volunteered to make their own collection and recently donated over 106 kilos of food to the food bank. Similarly, on the subject of food, and actually in their own time, staff have been baking furiously, and recent cake sales events in the council have raised £370 for Macmillan Cancer support, and today a further £176 for Mental Health Week. The third announcement, and with apologies to Councillor Eyre, Councillor Jones and others, unlike yourselves, I had prior warning of this and was able to sort out my hair. I'm going to refer to a photo of you in a minute. The background is that our website is undergoing some fairly significant changes. We now get about 72,500 visits to our website every month, and we are currently rewriting the whole site, and Councillor Mitchell will recognise this. Page culling is underway to help make the information more user-friendly. In the last couple of weeks, you should have seen a change to the front page of the website. In response to feedback, we've made it simpler, easier to read, with an easy-to-search A to Z. The most popular pages are now driven by the things that people are most looking for, and they're found on the top left-hand side of the page. Bigger photographs are now being used on the website, and this brings me to our problem. When you blow up the photograph that links you to the webcast, you find an empty council chamber. Fortunately, tonight we have a full council chamber, so I think group assistants were notified in advance. Sophia would like to take a quick photograph of the council in action so that we can use it on the website, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors and everybody. Thank you very much indeed for coming, yes. Now we come to public participation. We got none. Resignation and appointment. First from committees. Councillor Gavin James.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Brian Gurdon resigning from Arga to be replaced by Councillor Keith Watts.
Right. Anybody else? No. Now, to receive resignation from outside bodies and make any replacement. Anybody? Yes, Councillor James.
Councillor Mrs Waldridge to go on to Basingstoke Dial-A-Ride.
Is that agreed? Agreed. Yep. Petition. I have got no notice of any petitions, sir. Now we come to report to council, and this one actually I have decided that this report will be referred to AGA without debate for consideration. Is that agreed? Agreed. Lovely. Now, to receive and determine the following recommendation, Cabinet held on 24th of September 2013 regarding the policy for the allocation of the local infrastructure fund. Yes, Councillor Jayawardena.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleased to bring forward this proposal for the local infrastructure fund, which has been through discussion at EPP committee and prior to that, indeed, at a members' advisory panel. I'm pleased that we had cross-party engagement on this. I believe that there is a good policy here to ensure that we can get money spent in communities that have been affected by development to improve the infrastructure, and I believe that it's right that we are using 40% of that money directly in those local communities. There is 40% also still reserved for borough-wide infrastructure, an example of that being the improvements to M3 Junction 6. So this is part of a wider package. I believe that this does the job, and I recommend it to Council.
Sorry, seconder? Sorry, not seconder. Councillor Keith, Gary Watts was first, then Councillor Keith Watts.
Councillor Gary Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This borough is missing an important opportunity to use this new homes bonus money wisely. We have a housing crisis within the borough with 7,000 residents on the housing waiting list. We also have a massive infrastructure deficit within the borough. What does the council want to do with this money? It wants to allocate 40% of it, currently £3 million, which could rise to £7 million, in setting up another capital bidding process, which local organisations can bid for. And local councillors can actually bid for as well, on a first-come, first-come basis. This is not the strategic way to spend valuable money, assets. If these projects and schemes were so needy and so worthy, why wasn't 106 money used during the development stage? The allocation of this money isn't strategic. It's going to become a bureaucratic nightmare and could be open to political abuse. Other councils in Hampshire have used this money to offset their revenue support grant. But one council in Hampshire has actually used this money to build some homes, some affordable homes. And that council is Eastleigh Borough Council, a progressive council. This council should follow Eastleigh's suit and look at building some affordable homes with this new bonus money. If we're not going to use this money to build affordable homes, we should stick all 80% of it into key council infrastructure priorities, which the other 40% is going to. During the current local plan, it was reported by consultants, if all the schemes that go ahead in the current local plan, there will be a shortfall of £250 million, which is an awful lot of money. And as members know, that is going to get worse, because we have got no local plan, we've got no 5-year housing supply, we've got no seal infrastructure set up, and as members know, developers are actually bringing forward their sites. We've lost Kiln Farm already on appeal. Razors Farm is going to come forward. Kennel Farm is going to come forward. We're not going to get any 106 money. As I said, we haven't set up our seal. So, and also the government is looking to top slice this money as well. There's a consultation going out now where it wants to use 35% of this budget to give it to a business-led enterprise, LEPs. So much for localism and the bonfire of the Quangos. This is going to be so undemocratic, taking money away and giving it to an unelected Quango. Also, the funding arrangement within this paper is unfair. We all know that the majority of the development within this borough has actually gone on the east of Basingstoke, Popley, Chinham, but collectively it's all taken as Basingstoke as a whole. So it's totally unfair. Somebody in Hatchwarren or even South Ham can actually bid for this money when the money should be spent in Popley or Chinham. So in light of this funding uncertainty, it would be unwise for this council, but it would be wise for this council to revisit the allocation of this new homes bonus money to support a strategic way forward. This money shouldn't be used for short-term political gain. It should be used for long-term strategic needs in this borough. And I hope that members would support me in voting down this recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Keith Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like Councillor Gary, I was a member of the member advisory panel, and we argued together for the new homes bonus to be spent on housing. In my case specifically, I wanted to reduce the rental price of social housing. But the portfolio holder had a fairly good argument against us because this full council had already decided to the contrary. So we're moving on from that decision and how this local infrastructure fund should be spent. I'm grateful to the portfolio holder. In my absence, I asked the map to change the way in which a limit is set for individual contributions and below which pooling. Actually, when I received a table that showed a black line above the name Whitchurch, I really thought someone was trying to wind me up, which of course is very difficult to do. The amended recommendation is that the sum of money available should be the limiting factor. Now, I believe that even that is not an absolute, and Councillor Joward-Wardner has had a word about that today. So this has, perhaps uniquely, been a member advisory panel where the advice has been taken. And so I support the motion as it is. Nothing more to say, really, except that I already know how it should be spent in Whitchurch. And what's really important in the minutes, there's extensive reference to the role of local ward members. Gary seems to think that's potentially corrupt. But I believe it's really important. There's so many things in this council where things happen over the head of the locally elected member. What one former cabinet member used to go over the heads of members to parish councils and get them to agree with them, regardless of the fact we were elected here for the statutory and non-statutory functions of this council, and we really are the people who do the work and know what's going on. That isn't in the recommended paper, but it's in the minutes extensively. I believe that Councillor Joward-Wardner agrees very much with that as well. So let's make sure that happens. And it does mean that we're going to have to do some work, because if there's several proposals in our ward, then we're going to have to evaluate them and explain to other members here why one's better than the other.
Thank you. Councillor John Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure you've noticed that there are 3 very important words missing from Appendix 2, and they are Sherborne St. John. And I'm not happy. I find it extraordinary that the area of the borough, which has been used to provide the land for the largest part of the new homes development over the past 10 years, namely the parish of Sherborne St. John, is not even mentioned in the schedule of communities which are recommended to receive an allocation of the bonus for local infrastructure. During my time as the member for Sherborne St. John, development has taken place at Rookstown, Merton Rise and Marnell Park, all of which were part of the Sherborne St. John parish. Now I'm told that the bonus will go to the areas in which the developments now sit, namely Rookstown and Popley. It has been suggested to me that Sherborne St. John could apply for the bonus allocated to, and I quote, the Basingstoke town area. Well, try telling the residents of Sherborne St. John that they are part of the town. You'd be lynched. The residents have suffered as much as anyone as a result of all the past developments, in terms of loss of landscape, additional traffic, and all the other problems which come as a result of being close to an urban area such as light pollution. And they still have the developments at north of Marnell Park and the old golf course to come. It cannot be right that those whose lifestyle and enjoyment of the open countryside suffer as a result of neighbouring development get nothing in return. Are we now suggesting that the residents of Wootton St. Lawrence, which incidentally is misspelt in this document, will not be entitled to any compensation as the Manydown development approaches that village? I trust that is not the case. This proposal has not been properly thought through, and until it is, I will be voting against it, and I hope others do too. And I agree with much that Councillor Gary Watt said. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gavin James.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I must admit, if I designed the scheme myself, it probably wouldn't look like it does. However, we are where we are. I would prefer to spend the money on affordable homes and social housing, and as soon as the Labour group tell us where they intend to build them, I'm sure I'll fall over to their side on it. Good luck with finding the space. However, this is money going to the local community. As a great believer in localism, to give community groups the opportunity to decide how infrastructure money is spent seems eminently sensible. There are lots of schemes that I've been approached by residents that I'd like to support, and funding has always become an issue. And these aren't necessarily schemes just for East Drop, but the wider area. My only concern with the paper as it is, in terms of progress we've made, and I'd rather we spent the money on community schemes and left it in reserve forever, is that the value, the £25,000 bottom limit, I would prefer schemes to be chosen on merit rather than on cost. There's a very good scheme in my ward I've been trying to get off the ground for a few years. Officers have drawn up the plans. It's to the benefit of the whole of the community, including East Drop, and it's going to cost about £11,000. And I don't want to find myself in a bizarre conversation with an officer to work out how we can make it cost more money just so it meets the criteria. However, I have had the assurance from the portfolio holder that 25,000 is a guide and that worthy schemes will be considered below that, and I'm sure that limit will be reviewed. And as long as he confirms that when he sums up, then I will support it, because I see little value in blocking money going to help the communities.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is an interesting debate because of what the money was originally intended for from government, let alone what we're doing with it. And then again, what the LEPs are going to wind up doing with it. And I think there's bits of this that do need teasing out. You know, you can understand the scheme in one respect, but then to have the 60 of us fighting over each other, or our wards, the 20 awards fighting over each other as to who gets what and who doesn't get what and who loses and who wins over schemes, is in some way a distraction and silly, because we've got other budgets like the environmental improvement budgets and so on in there to do these smaller schemes. The whole purpose of the New Homes Bonus, the whole reason for its existence, was to do the big ticket items that other budgets couldn't hit and couldn't meet. And other authorities up and down the country are doing it. So 20% of it currently goes to Hampshire, 80% is going to stay with us. The 80% that stays will get split up even further. 20% goes into the general revenue budget to make up the shortfall that we're seeing because of all the issues we face in our revenue budget. 40% is for key council infrastructure, just 40% for key infrastructure, and then 40% for this community infrastructure. The bit that worries me is the bit that relates to the new let rules, because they're going to take 35%, which is going to get top sliced off. So we won't see that. Central government will top slice it off. And don't get me wrong, I remember all the arguments about CEDA and CERA and what they got up to. It's amazing how history repeats itself, isn't it? And in that context, that's 35%. So that's £5.5 million that Basingstoke and Dean may not get. But Runnymede might get it, Surrey Heath might get it, Elmbridge might get it, and their housing targets are massively reduced compared to ours, yet they may get a slice of our pie. Where's the justice in that for the residents of Basingstoke and Dean? The policy isn't thought through. The other aspect to this that is related totally to us here in Basingstoke is that, as Gary rightly says, we don't have a local plan at the moment. We don't have a SIL schedule. What we've got are applications coming through an appeal that will have no contribution to the strategic infrastructure in this borough. And I mean none, because they will each be considered on the merits at a planning committee, and they will make Section 106 contributions amongst others that will be in effect only have to prove and sit in front of an inspector that they can consume their own smoke, not that they can contribute to a wider strategic goal. So in some ways, I feel sorry for the people of Hatchwarren and Kempshott when they need £21 million spending on their local roundabout to cope with the developments that are coming their way. And where is the borough? Where are we going to get it from? Because it ain't going to come from SIL, and now it isn't going to come from the New Homes Bonus either. It's not going to come from those major capital funds that we have. And what we're actually going to wind up with, Mr. Mayor, is a competition, really, isn't it? It's between what the LEP are going to try and do, what individual members and wards may do, fighting for park benches, bins and other things that they may choose they want to bid for, and then we're going to have the big ticket items. And my worry is that those big ticket items at the moment, nobody has said how they're going to get paid for. And the Chinham roundabouts just go along with the Kempshott roundabouts, just go along with all the other infrastructure issues that P&I really deliberated in some significant detail. Nobody has said how in the world we pay for any of that at the moment. Meanwhile, the developers carry on pushing through their developments as soon as they can. And as soon as all the big strategic items are gone, what do we do then? When all those big strategic sites are through an appeal, what do we do then? So this new homes bonus is important, and how we choose to spend it is important. And if we don't protect it and we don't safeguard it in the context of the big ticket items, it will not be to the benefit of the residents of this borough, but it might be somewhere else if the LEP decides to spend our £5.5 million in another borough who we happen to have a relationship with through a quango that the government set up to replace Cedar and Sierra.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to sound a word of caution about spending infrastructure fund money on revenue items. We've done this in the past. Just to give a brief example, just in my area, we spent some of Hatchwarren and Beggarwood's Section 106 money on subsidising a bus service. The idea was the bus service would be pump primed by the investment and the community would benefit. The problem was it didn't work. When the Section 106 investment was used up, the bus service stopped. Money that should have benefited my residents ended up being spent with nothing long-term to show for it for our residents. And it's not that it's a bus service that concerns me. I have misgivings in general about spending one-off receipts on revenue items. It's almost a contradiction in terms to do that. My preference is to spend the monies we receive on capital investments, such as community facilities, something much needed in the local area, something tangible for the residents. Spending one-off receipts on revenue items is a recipe for under-provision of much-needed infrastructure, and the opportunity to make good the missed opportunity may never present itself again. I fully support, therefore, the concept of capital funding, and I'm happy to see that much of this capital funding will be concentrated in the areas in which it's raised, which this report does, and I support the report.
Thank you. I'll take Councillor Shaw as the last speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think one of the important things in this kind of debate is internal consistency in terms of the arguments that we advance. And one of the difficulties I have with the Labour Party's position is that on the one hand, they're critical of central government for top slicing, as they describe it, presumably for strategic reasons, and yet they actually propose the council top slicing its money, which is after all generated from housing at the local level. They propose sort of top slicing the resultant bonus for the council's wider purpose, and I think it's a welcome development in the direction of localism. I know that many of the residents in my ward are critical of what they see as a lack of transparency about how Section 106 contributions historically have been spent. They want greater local control and greater involvement by local communities and local ward councillors in the way in which these kind of funds are spent. And this proposal is a step in the right direction in that respect.
Thank you. Councillor Wardina, would you sum up, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I thank members for their contributions. Let me perhaps go in reverse order. I thank Councillor Shaw for commenting on the value of localism here, and that's what this is trying to achieve, in that the money that has been raised through New Homes Bonus is spent in part in the communities that have received that development. And that is a very important principle. It's good that we're, I hope, tonight getting on and using this money to the benefit of communities, which is what I hope we all are here to try and achieve. And I'm sorry that Councillor Harvey has tried to perhaps confuse the matter here, because top slicing of New Homes Bonus money to let is something that's under consultation. It's not something that has been decided yet. It's something that has been factored into this report, and it's another matter entirely. What we're talking about is the money that's already been accrued, that we have in our accounts ready to invest in the communities of Basingstoke and Deane. And to Councillor Watt's point on the fact that actually there is there are ideas that he already has in Whitchurch, and that ward members should have a role in being able to say, I think this is a good idea, I believe that there's a project here to invest in. That is something I completely endorse. I'm willing to put that on the record, and it's something that is in here in the page 4274, that on the application form, ward members' views are critical, and indeed that it's comments and support that's required in order to ensure that ward members are integrally involved in the process. And on the point around affordable homes, I think it's really important to remember that this new homes bonus money is accrued to deal with the development that we've already had. So it's about trying to ensure that the communities that have had development get a benefit as a result. So that ties with Councillor Leek and his comments that I'm pleased to put on the record that in para 742 it talks about the affected communities, and while I agree it's a statement of fact in Appendix 2 that Sherburn St John is not listed in the table, the fact is that Sherburn St John has been affected by development, and I accept that, I recognise that, and it's something that we're trying to tackle through this policy, and 742 recognises that. It also, in 5.2, talks about the geographic areas and says that actually provision of infrastructure can often be delivered in one place to benefit a wider area. So that's another recognition that development pressures are being taken into account by this policy. I'm very pleased to put on the record my conversation with Councillor James earlier in respect of para 743, which talks about the fact that bids should be for sums in excess of 25,000 because there are other funds available. But of course every bid will be considered on its merits. And clearly, if there's a very good scheme that benefits a community that has received the development and it's designed in support, supported by the ward members and the community, then that's something we should of course consider. And I'm very happy to give him my assurance this evening. So to conclude, there is money here that has been accrued from the communities that have experienced development. We are taking provisions to ensure that there will be money available for key borough-wide infrastructure, but at the same time, we want to ensure that the communities that have had the development get money invested in those communities right now. It's important that we take a decision tonight to ensure that residents benefit from the development that has already been experienced. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to put it to the vote. All four? Those against? Clearly carried.
Could I have my vote against recorded, please?
Yes. Councillor John Lake? Notice of motion, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're asking tonight in this motion for us to investigate thoroughly, understand, and then take action on the issue of debt and credit that so many people are facing in Basingstoke. This is a really human issue, one of poverty, of desperation in many cases to make ends meet at the end of a week or month, where pay simply isn't keeping up with living costs. We're debating this on the same day when Southern Electric have put up their energy prices by 8%. Now, in my local post office, I've seen people coming in to top up their gas and electric cards, their keys, using money that they've borrowed. This is the real world that many people are living in Basingstoke. There's some really good work being done here cross-party in Westminster. All three parties acknowledge the issues, have said that the payday industry does need to be controlled, that there is need to act, and there is change happening in law. And we'd like to see the same cross-party approach here. In other councils around the country, action's being taken. Birmingham City Council, with cross-party support, wants to introduce bylaws blocking firms like Wonga from opening up shops on the high street and restrict advertising and marketing. They're teaming up with 18 other councils in the country, Liverpool, Newcastle, Sheffield, Leeds, Islington and so on, all drawing up proposals. Lambeth Council, for example, recently held a summit involving local banks and credit unions on how they could open up banking and affordable credit to people who had previously been denied it. In Southwark, the Lib Dems and Labour group are looking at planning laws and rules to prevent the expansion of payday lenders in their high streets. We want this council to lead. and also be an exemplar for tackling debt and crises issues, credit issues. To March this year, the Basingstoke CAB has helped just over 10,000 people. Half of them had debt issues. And the geography of debt is not quite what you might expect it to be. Brookvale, Eastrop, Chinham and Grove feature high up the list that the CAB has. But what are we actually talking about here? Within my own ward, we see door-to-door loan sharks pushing loans where the costs can be astronomical. But when people are desperate, they don't often hear or care about that. People become frightened and they're bullied into taking out loans to pay off the original creditor. And it leads to a spiral of debt. And it can take years to pay off relatively small amounts. People may need £100, but they end up owing many, many times that. And of course the problem is that many people who are already in debt are often forced to go to the less credible lenders because the banks won't lend to them in the first place. There are a number of issues going on in Basingstoke at the moment that are compounding the problem. The increase, well above the national average in repossessions, is a problem. Repossessions in Basingstoke were running at 5.3 per thousand. It's 4.3 in the rest of the UK and 2.75 in the rest of Hampshire. Those figures don't include mortgage possessions either. Mortgage possession orders. The CAB last year saw 400 people who were in rent arrears, 428 who had unsecured loan debt issues. And then there's the research that Unite has published recently that shows that the average size of a payday loan has doubled in the last 12 months, from 328 12 months ago to £660 now. There are very limited alternatives at the moment. The credit union is located 15 minutes walk from the town centre. It's hidden away on the Riverdene estate. And I tried phoning them today, and I got an answer phone message telling me that they were only open 2 days a week, 9:30 to 12:30. It's not well advertised, and it isn't even on a bus route. But if I phoned Wonga, I could have an unguaranteed loan in 5 minutes. There's an online company called Payday Loans in Basingstoke. It advertises a 1-hour process with no credit checks, no proof of the ability to pay, for up to £1,500 in a payday loan.
1 minute.
You'll fill out a form to give access to your bank account. And the issue here is that the site is a third-party lender. So you give over your bank details, and then they have the right to take the money out of your account on top of any penalties and interest that they also choose to charge you. The Money Shop in Queen's Parade. They offer short-term loans at 3,000% APR. These are the issues that we're dealing with. So we want to see additional money invested in a CAB in a full-time post to field the increasing volume of calls that they're getting. And we want to see this borough put up signage so people know where the CAB is actually located. We know that the credit union exists. Not many people do know the credit union exists, and how do they know it exists? When you're in a desperate place, the credit union is only available for a few hours a week anyway. So as long as you're desperate on a Tuesday morning at 10 a.m, it's okay. This would be a perfect example, Mr. Mayor, of how to spend £800,000 of investor-grow money in a credit union shop in the town centre. And I would ask, you can't do justice to this in 20 minutes of debate in this chamber. These issues need to be looked at carefully with the CAB and Money Lifeline, as we've said. These payday loan sharks and companies, Mr. Mayor, are preying on very vulnerable people in our town, and we would like to see some action taken on it collectively with cross-party support.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Cousin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to second the motion, and indeed, before I begin in the main element of my contribution, I would like to take this opportunity to thank staff at our local CAB and Money Lifeline who assist our residents in tackling the issues and concerns surrounding debt. They do an incredible amount of work on limited funding, and it should be recorded how highly we value them in our community. The main point of our motion tonight is clear. With more and more people seeking guidance from these bodies about their growing debts, we must now step in and play our part too. We can't stand idly by while big corporations say that a payday loan with an APR of over 5,000% is acceptable. And in fact, a news report yesterday shows us how these companies behave. Wonga, the online payday lender, had a radio advert banned by the Advertising Standards Agency. And what was the reason for the ban? The ASA deemed that the advert was irresponsible because, and I quote, it gave the impression that a high-interest short-term loan was something that could be taken routinely in between wages. I mean, that says it all, doesn't it? These are how these companies behave, and I hope we can all agree that the advert was wrong and the decision taken by the ASA was the right one. From the CAB report, we can see that last year far too many people were speaking to them about debt. But a question that we must ask ourselves is, how many residents didn't get to the CAB because their eyes and heads were turned by the bright lights of those companies on our high street and in the town centre? A friend of mine works for a similar company outside of Basingstoke, and I asked him about this because we have a motion that we put forward tonight. He said he wishes he didn't work there, and it's not because of the pay or the hours that he works, but it says it's because of the people and the families who he sees time and time again who see a payday loan as a way out of debt. He told me, and I quote, "They get themselves in a tailspin, and once they realise they can't afford the repayments, they borrow money from elsewhere. They borrow from Peter to pay Paul, borrow from Harry to pay Paul, Sandra to pay Harry." And the loop goes on and on and on, and until there's a breaking point where usually a family member has to bail them out. Now, unfortunately for some, that family member isn't an option, and people find themselves in a really vulnerable position where evictions take place. We can't allow that to happen in our town. With bills rising faster than wages, it's no wonder that our most vulnerable residents feel cornered into entering the scourge that is the payday loan company. But we can help put a stop to this. By supporting our motion tonight, we give ourselves the best opportunity to debate how we want to tackle these companies. We can debate what is acceptable lending and what isn't. We can consider banning adverts on bus stops. We can consider banning access to their websites from council computers in libraries and community centres. Coupled with this, we must offer an alternative. That's where the credit unions come in. With lower rates, local advice and a shop front in our town centre, we must do more to support and promote this team. Link this promotion of the credit union with further help from the CAB, who can give real guidance to those residents who are struggling to make ends meet. Finally, Mr. Mayor, by supporting this motion tonight, we are sending a message to those bullying companies, and the message is loud and clear. We don't want to do business with you. We don't want our residents to do business with you. You prey on the vulnerable, and Basingstoke and Dean won't stand for it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Golding.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I welcome this motion, and I shall be voting for it. These are issues that should be explored in committee, presumably community well-being. There is absolutely no doubt that large numbers of residents in this borough are facing serious debt issues that they are unable to resolve without advice and support. As a senior advisor at Money Lifeline, I meet some of them every week. At Money Lifeline, we have a long waiting list of appointments. I entirely agree with Councillor Harvey's description of the problem, and I agree with him that the cross-party approach at Westminster is entirely welcome. Payday loans are, however, only part of a much larger problem, but they are a very important part, and some people get into very serious difficulties, financial difficulties, through borrowing from payday lenders. Most of the national charities who are lobbying in this field recognise that there is a place for responsible payday lending. If you need to borrow for a very short period of time to your next payday, and you can't borrow from friends or family, a payday lender may be your only option. The problem is that there is very little responsible payday lending and a huge amount of irresponsible lending. And a lot is being done to tackle this nationally. As Councillor Cousins has already mentioned, the Advertising Standards Authority has been banning adverts by some of the payday loan companies. In March, the Office of Fair Trading, who are the current regulator, gave the leading 50 payday lenders, who account for 90% of the market, 12 weeks to change their business practices or risk losing their licenses, after it uncovered evidence of widespread irresponsible lending and failure to comply with the standards required of them. As a result, some payday lenders stopped trading and others have had to improve their practices. Currently, the Financial Conduct Authority, the government's new regulator, which takes over next year, is consulting on a much tighter code of practice which would address all the main problems with the payday loan industry. The FCA is proposing new rules limiting the number of times a payday loan can be rolled over, which, as Councillor Harvey said, is where the problems often come. You take out a second loan to pay off the first and a third to pay off the second, and the costs escalate. They're also proposing a limit on two unsuccessful attempts to use a continuous payment authority. Again, as Councillor Harvey mentioned, payday lenders get people to sign an authority which gives them much more power than a direct debit would, and this is also to be limited. There's going to be a risk warning on all payday loan adverts, and payday loan providers will be required to provide an information sheet including information on free debt advice before a loan is rolled over. So as the FCA says, their aim is to ensure that firms only lend to borrowers who can afford it. By dealing with rollovers and continuous payment authorities, it will make it unattractive to have a business model which assumes that people won't make the repayments. And it will also increase borrowers' awareness of cost. And I'm pleased to see that this seems to be getting widespread support both at Westminster and around the country. Mr. Mayor, so far as the action proposed by this motion is concerned, the proposals for an ethical lettings policy and planning restrictions would have a limited impact because most payday lending is online. They are, however, worth exploring in committee as, quote, every little helps, unquote. In relation to an ethical lettings policy, officers are not aware of any payday loan companies who are tenants of the council at present, but we could certainly consider an ethical policy in relation to new leases, and officers are already required to consult the portfolio holder if there is a risk that a new letting may be contentious. However, we need to be aware that an ethical lettings policy would only go so far, as we are bound by landlord and tenant legislation and could not unreasonably withhold consent for an existing tenant to assign their lease to a payday loan company, although I'm sure we could consider the issue if it arose. In relation to planning policy, payday lending falls within A2 use class financial professional services. Trying to restrict the number of payday lenders in specific areas might well exclude other types of use, such as banks and building societies, or even a credit union or the Hampshire Community Bank.
1 minute.
So we need to be very careful about that. But again, this needs exploring in detail in committee. As far as Money Lifeline is concerned, I would be happy to present to councillors a first-hand account of the issues that we and our clients are facing, although we're not looking for help from the council and have never sought council funding. And as with my other hat on, I and the leader are already considering a request from the CAB for additional funding. As Cabinet Member for Housing, I already have work in hand with Sentinel and Sovereign in relation to the credit union. We discussed them at our priority action group on the 3rd of September. Sentinel and Sovereign then went off and spoke to the manager at the credit union, and I checked on the following Monday that she'd had it. We've also in discussion with the Hampshire Community Bank, because they may have a role to play, and we've asked them to come and talk to us. So, Mr. Mayor, I support this motion. It isn't going to solve most of the debt problems faced by our residents, or even most of the problems they have with payday loan companies, but it's still worth considering what we can do as a council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Keith Watts.
Now, Mr. Mayor, I support the sentiments of this motion. I'm certainly enthusiastic about us listening to the CAB and Moneyline about what can be done to help, and I'm really encouraged by this sort of news we've just heard from Councillor Golding. Also, of course, I very much support the moves that are going on at Westminster to use legislative means to deal with this, but that is a matter for national legislation. I don't think that we should be giving people the impression that there's a lot this council can do about this. This motion fails, I think, like so many from the same source, and it goes on for too long. And the specifics worry me quite considerably. People will think that we're going to do something when in fact we're going to, on this, do some exploration and investigation. Now, ethical lettings policy, I was very puzzled about that, but if there's to be an ethical lettings policy, then perhaps I can ask that we ban betting shops, and some others will want tobacconists banned as well. I really don't feel that that's a route that we could go down. The word ethical it belongs with each person's set of ethics anyway. It's not as though it's a human rights issue where there's United Nations ruling on these things. So I think that falls as an example, and the planning policies likewise. What we would be doing here is interfering in a market that we don't understand, and it could be that with the lettings policy and the planning policy, we ensure that the strongest players in this market survive and can therefore monopolistically make the conditions for their lenders worse. So In principle, I'm in favour of the council learning what we can do. I'd be interested to know if the credit unions could step in here, but my understanding of their current terms of business, it doesn't fit here at all. But I can't vote for this motion. In fact, I should vote against it because I think it has too much in it that would basically be a cruel tease on people in desperate circumstances who expect that we're coming to their rescue.
Thank you. Councillor Gavin James.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The motion asks for cross-party support, so it's important we give that cross-party support. I certainly support the intent of the motion, even if the content is rather weak. I have to say the speeches were better than the original written motion. I've no doubt in my mind there are some very unscrupulous lenders out there. They prey deliberately on the most financially vulnerable and those that are least aware of how finance works, and gets them into terrible trouble. Their marketing is aimed at those people specifically, and it's a very cruel business. In terms of the details that are put down, in terms of ethical lettings policy, I think it's been mentioned by enough people, that is a very hard one to judge, really. I should say that the Co-op bank, if you go £10 overdrawn, you get charged a flat fee of £20, so that works out as an APR of 7,300%, and I'm not sure we want to ban the Co-op from the high street. Indeed, if you consider Halifax Lloyds TSP, if you go overdrawn by £10, they charge you £1 a day, which works out as an APR of 3,650%, so they've got to go as well. My pet hate is a certain retailer based in the Mals that sells products on a very comfy weekly rate that actually has an APR of 70%. That's a long-term loan over a year, which means you pay obviously something like £500 for a £290 washing machine, and that gets people into trouble as well. So there are lots of them out there. I'm not sure we can ban them. The motion does have some elements that I think are very supportable, that we should do, but it talks very much about a sort of labour solutions, control, restrictions, stop, prevent, and all this kind of stuff. I'd like the committee, yes, to consider them, but also consider the liberal solutions, that empowering individuals to make the sensible decisions, giving them the knowledge and the expertise, looking at what we can do with our registered social landlords, what we can do with our sixth form colleges, indeed even our schools, because people get into debt at a very young age and take out vast amounts of mobile phones to get themselves into debts, to look at what we can do with the Sure Start centres and all the other agencies we could possibly work with to make sure we can get a message out there to make sure that people are better informed and don't land into trouble again. Because there's obviously a twin approach. There's possibly not an enormous amount, particularly as they're based online, that we can do about reckless lending, but we could do an awful lot about misguided borrowing, and perhaps we should focus on that primarily, and certainly that should be included when it's discussed in committee. But I will support the motion so people are aware it has cross-party support.
Thank you. Councillor Laura James.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to give you some examples of people who have used payday loans or have also been in absolute crisis. A family nearly losing their home was where the payday loan company took their payment as soon as the borrower was paid. This left them without any money to pay for food, other debts, or for his mortgage. This practice of continuous payment authority, where the lender automatically takes the loan, is widespread and may explain our increase in the number of food bank vouchers and parcels. And then the Chief Executive tonight talked about 2,000 people accessing the food bank. Well, I felt actually ashamed sitting here, a wealthy authority, and we're actually handed out 2,000 food parcels. I didn't feel any way proud of that. I was ashamed of it. Recently, a person had existing debts of £25,000 and was given a loan of £430 within 10 minutes by a lender in a Basingstoke without any checks. 3 weeks later, they wanted £590. The client's monthly income is just over £600 a month. This loan was made despite the existing debts to 15 different creditors, including, and it goes on to say what they are, and one of those being their rent. Another one talks about someone with a mental illness and being on a fixed low income. Her only income is through benefits. She has 4 different payday loan companies totaling £700, and it goes on. And the thing is now she's being absolutely hounded to repay her payments. And she is now at the point of feeling suicidal, and the risks to her mental health are enormous. We have lots of examples. I had another case the other day where a woman rang up this council and couldn't afford to pay her council tax and said, would they wait some time? And the answer was no. Then she returned to Wonga and got herself into enormous debt and then missed a payment on Wonga. And that small loan that she borrowed to pay her council tax was just out of her control. We have example after example. We were talked about, and I think Gavin talked about the company in the town and talked about a washing machine. Well, that example of that company that is one of our tenants, you can buy a washing machine there for £800, and then the actual cost of that washing machine over 3 years is going to be £1,600. That washing machine, if you went down the road to Curry's, you could have got that washing machine for £400 or less. These people are very vulnerable. There's nowhere for them to go. Ethically, is it right that we actually have these tenants? We need to have that debate. Maybe we decide it is right, but we need to have that debate as to ethically what we want from our tenants. Doesn't mean that we won't choose to have certain people in the town, but we want that debate. I talked today as well to the housing associations as to what they're doing. Sentinel are about to look at setting up their own solution. It may be part that when we actually get this presentation, we ought to hear what they're going to do, because they're effectively setting up their own payday lending, and they're putting and pump priming lots of money. But it's not right that that person that wants that washing machine doesn't know where the credit union is, doesn't know that if they had access to that, they actually may not have had to pay that £1,600. These are people who are vulnerable on exceptionally low incomes, but may need a washing machine. That's an essential item, and it is important that we as a borough ensure that there is choice.
1 minute.
And that they are able to access a credit union, and we should be expanding that. And it's about what we want to do as a town. Is it right that we build and we fund coffee shops, or do we fund credit unions? What's the ethics in that? What do you think? Should we be funding those things, or is it better really that we fund things that the most vulnerable in our town need, and we need to support those people? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey, to sum up, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll keep this short. I'd like to thank Councillor Golding for his comments and agree. And this is one of the few times we do, Councillor Golding, but I completely agree with what you said and see where you're coming from. I agree with most of a lot of what colleagues said, but I would just pick up a couple of things. The LGA is setting out best practice. There are councils up and down this country that are taking action. It isn't just a Westminster thing, because the Westminster solution can fix the national. The local fixes the local. And we need an element of good policy that can make a difference. And in that context, planning policy is important, and so is licensing. If we can license for sex establishments, why in the world can't we deal with the payday lending aspect of this? It makes you the things you can do and the things you can't do, and the arguments that go with that. And there is one thing here, there is nothing in this motion that Lib Dem, Labour and Conservative councils are not already doing up and down this country. There is not a single proposal in this motion that is not already being implemented by other councils. And I do think of Southwark, and I do think of Birmingham and so on, with cross-party support on the ethical side of things, because, you know, this isn't the first time that the Labour group have mentioned ethics. It's not the first time that others on the other side of the chamber have talked about ethics. And it certainly isn't the first time that Liberal Democrats have talked about ethics. In all groups, we have discussed the responsibilities of a public authority letting its buildings in that context, and that should be part of a debate. And I would just finish on this. The issue about banks and the issue about discussing other elements of funding and where people can get funding is that most of the people we're talking about are the people that don't have a bank account, are the people that cannot get a bank account because of their credit issues. And we've got numerous examples, many examples, the CAB do, of people who do have that issue and then are forced into different forms and different ways of trying to fund or keep themselves going in that context. And that's where the payday lenders prey on them. So I would just say this finally, I mean, these payday lenders and the loan sharks prey, and I really want to use that word, prey, on the most vulnerable and the poorest in our society. And we should decide, and we'll be positive about this, we should decide that we do not want them to get any further foothold in our borough. Simple as that. Please support the motion.
Thank you. All, I'm going to call for a vote now. All for? Oh, all against. Anybody against? Councillor Watt and anybody else? No. That's carried. Councillor Bierman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, colleagues. I hope this motion gets the same endorsement, but we shall see. You can't be a Chinham councillor without having lots of contact and casework to do with trees. It's very much a leading topic in the parish, but I don't come from that particular angle. I come because of recent experiences with the tree shading panel, the work of which has suddenly intensified. I think I would normally describe myself as a tree hugger and proud of it. I don't mind about people calling me that. I want to preserve as many as possible. And so it is with a heavy heart that I come along and say, but perhaps not all of them. I'm not talking here about TPOs, and those that aren't involved with the tree shading panel. I think there are quite a lot of members who are not totally up to speed with the different aspects of trees and whose ownership and who protects them and all the rest of it. So not having the time to go into it all, I'll just briefly say we're talking principally here about trees that are on public land owned principally by the Borough Council. And there are quite a lot of those. And the problem is that despite good intent, as mentioned in the motion in the past, to have green spaces and a nice, pleasant infrastructure in which to live and to do whatever one's doing, the preparation for the tree planting and the subsequent maintenance just hasn't been what is necessary. In fact, in truth, our tree maintenance has been lamentably poor. It has not been extensive, and it means that in certain locations where people are either in dwellings up against copses or against trees in the street that have been planted near to dwellings are now beginning to have serious problems, because in some cases the wrong species have been planted so that they are now beginning to completely dwarf dwellings and haven't had any maintenance over the years. And not only dwarf the dwellings, but also make the whole of the garden area and much of the internals of houses totally dank and unpleasant to live in. And this is not really what we're trying to achieve by having a green infrastructure. We're trying to make it pleasant, but not into a claustrophobic sort of atmosphere. We as a local authority do have a responsibility to maintain the trees to a proper level, and where the trees are unsuitable, we've got to think about possibly replacing them. The problem is there are so many. I suspect that Councillor Frankham will refer to it as well because it's her ward, but particularly noticeable is on long, well, not just her ward, but in many wards, long stretches of trees that have formed visual barriers and in part intended as sound barriers, but now are so massive that they can't be dealt with on a small scale. And if an individual householder says, well, this tree is affecting my garden, as they're part of a whole series of trees, you cannot do them in isolation. So you have to do possibly hundreds of trees at the same time. Hundreds of trees at the same time is a vast expense. At the moment, we're asking the people who are affected by these trees to do it at their own expense. That's a nonsense. It's not possible for many of them to do it, and even if they did, as I say, it would be piecemeal and it would look terrible and wouldn't be practical. And that's why this motion is suggesting not that we go and deal with every tree in the borough, but look at what the size of the problem is, estimate how one could address it, estimate the costs, and then decide on some way forward. Because if we don't do it voluntarily, the time will come when some of these trees will become a danger and we'll have no choice, and it'll be a massive cost, and they will also do structural damage to dwellings, and that in itself will also be a massive cost, and it's a time bomb waiting to explode. So let's just gather the facts, estimate how we deal with the remedy, and then take it forward. I'm not suggesting sums here, it needs research first, and that's why an Ofcom should be doing it. And with that, I beg you to support the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Frankham.
Right, thank you very much. Yes, and it is Councillor Mrs. Frankham, not Councillor Frankham, although he does agree with me. Not if you want to eat. Why am I happy to second this motion? It's because there can hardly be a councillor in this chamber that has not had residents coming to them about overgrown trees, trees that cut out the light and or TV reception, trees that the roots are damaging pathways or roots that grow under their fences and affect their ability to have a garden to be proud of and to enjoy. I was going back on my casework and was surprised at how long some of the residents have been fighting to get something done over certain trees. Mr. and Mrs. White, who've been trying for many years, were told years ago they're the wrong type of tree and that some are too close to the foundations of the properties. Mr. and Mrs. Gant, a lovely pensioner couple who've also been trying for nearly as long. Their garden is in shadow. The rooms are dark, the house is colder than their neighbours, and their fuel bills are way above their friends and family. Their quality of life is seriously impaired by this problem. They don't want them cut down, just managed so they can enjoy the rest of their lives. Councillor Bierman said about trees getting to a certain state. Well, we have had to have 2 cut down because they were in danger of falling on houses, and that was in Fountains Close. The tree appeal panel had an attempt to meet for the first time since 2007. Yes, almost unbelievable. So I will repeat it, 2007, where these types of cases were discussed. The problem is, and as I expect most of you will have been told, as in the motion, that many species were just not the right time and in many cases planted too close. Tree officer after tree officer have agreed, then said it's too expensive or too big an undertaking to tackle this issue, and still the trees grow bigger. A real strong policy on how to grasp the problem and long-term programme of renewal is urgently required. The proposed new policies is still to be discussed, and at the moment it's if a resident wants to have a troublesome Basingstoke and Dean tree removed, they can, if they pay the removal and a replacement. I asked for an estimate of cost. About £300 was the answer. So a resident will be expected to pay for a wrongly sited, wrong species of tree that's causing problems. That just doesn't seem right and fair to me. We can't duck this issue. You know, I know, the officers know, and most importantly, the residents that put their trust in us with their votes know that we need to start a real work programme to at least start to solve the problems that we know may take many years to resolve. A journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. The journey needs to start. So I second this motion in the hope that it reviews and surveys the problem and a report will come back to this chamber. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let me start by agreeing with the proposer and seconder about the importance of this issue. It's not often I agree with Councillor Bierman, as the Chamber knows, but I'd also describe myself as a tree hugger. I agree they are one of the most important things we have in this borough. It's one of the things that sets this borough apart from others, are trees that abound through the town and rural areas. I agree that much of the councillor's time is taken up with casework, running trees, shading, rooting grass, building damage. Of course, the issue is complicated, as we all know, because many are on housing association land or county land. I have to realise that the council does have a finite amount of money. We have to be careful, not with our money, but with taxpayers' money. We may not ever have enough money to do everything we would wish to do so. We must prioritise. We already spend about £250,000 a year on the worst trees and maintaining them. We introduced this year a policy which will allow people to pay for work on council trees that affect them but do not meet the criteria to have taxpayers' money on it. Residents are already feeding back that it's a policy that gives them choice if they wish to do it. I'm proud to have given them the choice and enabled residents who wanted something to happen to do it if they choose to do that. We do need, however, to separate the mistakes that were done in the design of our housing estates, in the selection of our trees, from the day-to-day maintenance we do it. I believe some of the comments that have been made about our tree maintenance are wrong. The spend this year is 285,000, up from 260 in 2009-10. I believe our officers, our tree officers and ground staff do a fine job and should be congratulated, and it's important that message comes from the Chamber. But Mr Mayor, however, this administration does believe this is a long-term important issue. We believe in tackling long-term important issues. We believe we do need to supplement our fine maintenance work with a longer-term programme. I've been talking and planning this with officers over the past year. Officers have already started the internal estimates. On the 25th of June, the head of service and myself presented at a budget workshop, and my cabinet colleagues agreed to support it and go forward. On the 4th of September, it was supported by the budget panel. On the 17th of September, in a workshop, it was confirmed to go into the medium-term financial strategy, and it's coming in that document to EPP first. But let me take the opportunity to flesh out the policy in more detail. In addition to the current maintenance funding, we will invest £500,000 over 5 years in the long-term proactive tree maintenance around 3 aims. 1, tackling tree issues in areas which pose a greatest risk of subsidence. 2, providing a more diverse structure and mix of trees where there are similar age or species to get around the exact problem of Councillor Bierman, etc. And 3, addressing no tree nuisance issues or lower priority safety issues such as overhanging branches, shades, leaf drop, etc. Mr Mayor, we're addressing the long-term problem which has not been addressed by this council in the past. So let me thank Councillor Bierman and Councillor Frankham for giving me, Mrs Frankham, for giving me the opportunity to announce our new policy. It's rare that we do get a formalised opportunity to announce new policies.
Minute.
We have it tonight. Thank you, Mr Mayor. As to the substance of the motion, the strategy is being prepared. The money has been secured. The strategy will go to H&E. The only thing we hadn't done was announce the policy. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. So, Council, I'd urge you all to support this motion, as it does generally talk a lot of sense, because we're already doing the work. To paraphrase Councillor Mrs Frankham, she said a journey starts with a single step. We're starting it tonight with 500,000 steps. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll be very brief. I too welcome this motion before the Council. And as a fellow ward councillor with Councillor Bierman, I'm only too aware of the issues that we have to address. We're probably one of the more wooded wards of the borough, the urban wards, even though we don't like to consider ourselves too urban. A lot of the trees in Chinham, as an example, we've been hearing a lot about the planted trees were the wrong type when they were planted. A lot of the trees in Chinham have been there for hundreds of years. I've got one about 30 yards, or less than that, behind my house. Must be one of the largest oaks in the borough. Now, the problem is, without maintenance, these ancient trees, which we really need to respect, need maintenance, proper maintenance. It's alongside Cuffield Lane. I found a map where Cuffield Lane was there. It was marked on maps in the 12th century. So that's how long these trees have been around. And the maintenance of them is essential. It's got the biggest canopy. I believe the gauge, somebody can probably advise me, is the size of the canopy is the size of the roots. Well, it scares me because some of them come over my house. I don't know where those roots are, but I get a little nervous. Now, the importance of
the development of a policy and a strategy that's been put forward tonight is absolutely vital. I welcome it wholeheartedly. Councillor Bierman and I have discussed this in a parish council. We're both parish members. So I welcome this. I ask the council, please, to endorse it, and we are on the right road this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I fully support this motion, but I do believe there's more to the problem than just tree maintenance. It's not always the case that the trees have been planted too close to the houses, but that the houses have been planted too close to the trees. Building houses too close to a tree belt, as we have in the past around the borough, is a recipe for trouble, not just for the householders, but also leads to the degradation of the tree belt, and sometimes that tree belt can be ancient woodland. We spent a great deal of time in H&E recently looking at this, and we've all agreed across parties that we need to protect both residents and trees by ensuring that new homes are built in the future with far more substantial buffers to protect residents and trees. Mr. Mayor, I firmly believe that this policy of increasing buffers should form part of any emerging tree strategy that we discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner, our Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I will start by declaring an interest, because I currently do have an application in for work on a tree subject to a TPO, which is adjacent to my house and is causing excess shading. It's my tree, and it was there before the house was built, but it has grown a hell of a lot since I moved in. And I remember the tree shading panel, the meeting in 2007. I was there. So was Sean. I'm not sure that Sean knew what a tree was, but but we explained it to him. But going back even further, the tree shading panel came about because of a meeting on an old committee when this subject came up, and the officer said, "We have no budget, there is nothing we can do." So I said to them, "If you had a budget, what would you like to do?" And they went away and they wrote a report, and as a result we had a tree shading panel with a budget, and it could do something. And I think that's where we want to go from here. Let's look at what we could do with a budget, and I think that is where Councillor Donnell is coming from, and just see what is possible, first of all, and then work from there. So I support the motion, and I think it is going to go to an Auscom, so let's vote in favour of it.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're in danger tonight of peace breaking out across the chamber. This is good news. This is good news. What I'd like to suggest here, I think, in terms of a couple of points that should be borne in mind, taking this forward, at least from our experience, is interesting. You talk about Chinham and the trees. You stand on top of Oak Ridge Towers, and you don't see that it is literally the tree canopy is huge across our estates. And the interesting point is about the solutions we find, because we've had examples where trees have been completely coppiced and completely taken to pieces by consultants that are brought in who don't necessarily know how to manage trees, but they take the drastic solution of killing the tree completely. And there's those examples where the trees are in hedges and the trees are in other growth and habitat, and how we manage the habitat is equally as important as how you manage the tree. And there's a whole biodiversity issue here that fits in with this, and I see the cabinet member shake, I agree, and that's an important point. Disease is also an issue. We definitely see that in terms of a number of our trees in the estate, and we see the issues being left, and then the disease gets worse, and then we lose a significant number of trees than we necessarily need to. So I guess the question is, and this can be teased out in committee, is whether the £500,000 is extra on top of, and where it fits in terms of the budget, and those would be questions obviously for the committee, but also the work with other agencies, because it's difficult in terms of Lotus with Sentinel, us doing our work with the borough and our consultants, and then the county very rarely doing anything, to be perfectly honest. And who picks up the missing piece of the puzzle? If you've got a tree on a piece of county land and they won't lift a finger to do anything, and Sentinel's tree happens to overhang a borough pathway or a borough tree overhangs a sentinel tenant, and where do we draw the lines in this in terms of joined up working? There are issues there because we lost the sentinel contract in terms of looking after our estates. And that is an issue going forward that needs to be really thought through, the joined up working across all these different agencies. But I do welcome the £500,000 extra because I think we found a solution for Councillor Barnes' almond tree problem. And I'm hoping, and those on DC will understand what I'm saying, and I'm hoping that our officers can now solve his problem for him in terms of his almond tree.
Thank you. Councillor Gurdon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I certainly welcome Councillor Donnell's statement tonight about extra funds for tree work over a 3-year period, £500,000. Good sounding sum of money. Should be able to do quite a bit, but I would warn him to stand to be prepared for a much longer and bigger period of investment. This council will need to steel itself for the bad news. Those of us who came to this borough about 30 years ago could have driven round the ring road, and it was a very open landscape. 30 years on, it's a very verdant landscape of which most of us are really very proud. Of course, there's been discussion already this evening about the inappropriate planting that's happened over the years. Certainly, the Development Corporation in their wisdom, put down 9,000 Norway maple in Brighton Hill alone, a tree noted for its self-seeding capacity. Pardon? Very well, yes, I know. Did you supply them, I wonder? But so it's not just about inappropriate trees that have been planted. Many of our housing developments have been built on former farmland, and again in my area, and I'm sure most wards have similar experiences, you have former hedgerows just situated just behind teeny-weeny gardens of terraced houses, and you have 100-foot high trees of mixed species, creating a great deal of problem. It's not just shade, it's undermining foundations and lots of other things. Old trees, I mean, okay, might go back to 12th century, but there are many trees that are over 100 years old that are approaching the end of their natural lifespan, and they're beginning to shed quite dangerous spars. So there are problems there, on top of which in its wisdom, this borough has, over the years, moved to try and plant more urban, suitable species, but very often these are trees of a shorter lifespan, cherry trees, for example. And again, in my ward, there are many, many cherry trees that are just about at the end of their lifespan. On top of that, of course, those of us who go back a while can remember Dutch elm disease, but of course now we've got ash dieback disease, horse chestnuts. You've only got to walk across the park and you'll see our horse chestnut trees under great stress from various aphids that are burrowing into the leaves. And only yesterday, if any of you watched any of the program on house building, Grand Designs, you'll have come across an example of Japanese larch, of which there's 150,000 hectares planted in this country, all of which are doomed for another viral infection. So I'd just like to know how many of our native species of trees and other widely growing trees are at risk from various viruses. It seems to be an escalating problem. So it's a big, big problem. It's not just trees that have been planted in the wrong place. It's trees that have been planted since that are of appropriate size, but at the end of their lives, there are trees that are under threat from parasites.
1 minute.
It's a big, big problem. I welcome the £500,000, but we'll be going forward from there, not back. And I will be supporting this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Bierman, would you sum up, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, obviously, there's not much more persuading need to be done. We'll just say to Councillor Reid, I wholeheartedly agree with her concerning the houses planted next to the tree as opposed to the tree next to the house. That is one of the problems that we have in Chinham. Very often that then involves a TPO. And I have often argued that people who move into a house next to a large oak shouldn't be surprised that they get an acorn or two drop in their garden, or even that a bird sits on a branch and drops other things on their motor vehicles. So yes, there are trees and trees, and as again Councillor Harvey has indicated, it's a very complex problem because of the ownership aspects and all these other things. So it does need a bit of time, and when you start looking into it, it's amazingly complex. I just wish to finish up on the to say exactly the same as Councillor Gurdon, and that is I massively welcome the direction that Councillor Donnell has indicated and the £500,000. But the reason that I wanted to put this motion forward is, as I said earlier, this is a time bomb, and I think at the end of the day the costs that are going to be involved are massive, and £500,000 will look almost like chicken feed in the end. And certainly, if we leave it for too long, the problem is going to be massively bigger. We've got to start tackling it soon and address trees that were never expected to be the size and the type that they are, that are totally overwhelming people, and that's quite different from moving next to an oak. If you have a little sapling at the back of your garden and suddenly it becomes a ginormous, overwhelming growth, then that's something quite different, and it needs local authority support, and that support isn't going to come cheaply, and that's why I'm grateful for the support that's been expressed tonight from all sides, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bierman. Is that agreed, or can I put it to the vote? Agreed. Thank you. Question, Councillor Bierman, on FCPR 3.18.
As per the order paper, Mr. Mayor.
Can I just ask some silence, please? Councillor Bierman.
As per the order paper, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, the answer to the question, both questions is yes.
Parliament.
Well, I'm surprised to hear the portfolio holder express contentment, because I have had, as a result of us putting out this wonderful publication saying get involved, a mass of expressions of concern because people wanted to get involved and didn't know how to. And does the portfolio holder think that that's a satisfactory situation? Because if we have gone through all our debates as we have, and then have said, do take part.
Question.
This is a question. And we have said, do take part, and then people don't know how to. Wouldn't you agree that that is unsatisfactory? Are you aware that, for instance, the web is ablaze with people expressing their concerns at having been unable to complete it? If you look at the Gazette website, there's a comment there that people have started and then given up. And I've certainly had that same expression of difficulty. And is the portfolio holder not in touch with the members of the public who have had these great difficulties in completing the process, which is supposed to engage?
Councillor Bierman, I have heard 3 questions. There was only a supplementary question that you have to ask, not 3 questions.
Well, I'm asking why the portfolio holder is content, and that was my original question, and now I'm explaining why I think he perhaps shouldn't be content. Mr. Mayor, if that's your ruling, I think the thrust of what I'm saying ought to be pretty evident. Thank you very much.
Councillor Raffet.
Well, Mr. Mayor, it is very unsatisfactory if they're replying to Councillor Bierman. They should be replying to the proper slot and not him. I can say I wasn't aware that the web was ablaze, and in terms of the multiple ways of responding, I can say that, well, letters have been written, emails have been sent, forms have been filled, many different ways of responding have taken place, even face-to-face meetings. So I'm surprised if they've got stuck talking to Councillor Bierman and haven't just responded in the usual way. So I'm happy.
Thank you. Now, item 13, we're going to receive en bloc the minutes for report and yeah, just a correction. Can I just have the questions from Councillor Watts and any other councillors?
Question 1 as on the order paper, Chairman.
Councillor Raphael.
Well, the answer to, Mr. Mayor, to the questions are, the first one is because it was drafted better, and the second one is no.
Supplementary?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I hope Councillor Raphael doesn't believe that talk of peace breaking out applies in this case, and the coalition of the grown-ups that saw the local plan through at the last meeting isn't continuing. What then does he propose will happen to reduce congestion in Whitchurch, and when will the action start?
Councillor Raphael.
Well, that is a million miles away from the original question, which was about grammar, semantics, and language. The original question, question why the following was a problem, which was 4.23, general infrastructure constraints including education, the historic road infrastructure, which leads to local congestion and sewage treatment, will be addressed where possible in the site-specific policies and through the infrastructure delivery plan. It's my view that's better wording than what was there previously. It doesn't weaken what was there previously. So I reiterate my original reply, which was to his question, which was questioning, was there a weakening? The answer is no.
Thank you. Second question, Councillor Watt.
Question 2 as on the order paper.
Thank you. Councillor Osselton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Watts, thank you for your question. Having spoken to you, I think, earlier in July after our meeting at Ofcom, I can say to you that the shared plan to improve health and well-being in Basingstoke and Deane has just been published and by the Wellbeing Partnership, and the plan states, especially on page 4, is what you would probably like to hear, is that it is noted that a number of clinical commissioning groups serve the population of Basingstoke and Deane. While North Hants CCG covers the majority of the borough, the population in some parts is covered by West Hants CCG, which I believe that is St Marybourne and yourself, Whitchurch, Newbury and District CCG, and North and West Riding CCG. The outcomes described in this shared plan are outcomes for the whole borough to be achieved through improved collaboration, collaborative working among all relative partners and agencies, including the relevant CCGs. The partnership's terms of reference also enables representation from each CCG. The shared plan has been sent to the chair of each of the clinical commissioning groups, and it is hoped that through their relevant GP lead covering Basingstoke and Deane, they will engage with the partnership to exchange information and explore joint working opportunities. At the moment, I am hoping to go to the out of areas and speak to them and see what their actual plan is. But the plan that we have here, the shared plan to improve, is for our borough and for those three that are on the cusp.
Thank you. Supplement?
No, thank you. I'm glad to hear it is work in progress.
That's for your third question, but before you say anything, can I thank you for submitting your questions in advance?
It's not always practicable, Mr. Mayor, but I was happy to do so this time. So question 3 is on the order paper.
Councillor Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I may have to start by declaring that I do provide marketing consultation to clients on a professional basis, but I suspect that's not the real point of Councillor Watt's question. Let me just state that it is this administration's policy intention to increase the availability of public conveniences. And that's why we're engaging with local communities, whether it be town councils, parish councils, businesses and local members. At least one parish council is already proactively engaging with us about how to set up community-based toilet schemes to improve it. We also want to increase the quality of toilets, hence why we're investing in Caston Yard and investing in East Drop. Now, back to the marketing advice and the slogan. As a marketeer, I'd love to set up a workshop, do a SWOT analysis and speak ad nauseum about slogans, but my colleague, Councillor Finney, has this well in hand to sell this borough to new employers to get new jobs for this great borough. I await your supplementary with interest.
Thank you. Supplementary.
I wondered if the portfolio holder was aware, and is he aware of some of the suggestions that have been raised? A senior member of this council suggests it should be Basingstoke and Dean, keep your legs crossed. Several other suggestions that I've received, delicacy prevents me from giving the whole story, but if you imagine pride being replaced by any other word you can think of, it's in our gutter.
I don't know.
Mr. Mayor, I think those slogans may just justify the need for marketing consultants. Let me just finish by continuing and re-emphasising our commitment to better public conveniences, better available to residents, and working with local communities to achieve that.
Thank you. Now we come to receive en bloc the minutes for report of the following meetings.
Yeah, but you need to see you check if there's any questions on the minutes.
Any questions?
On the minutes.
Yeah. Is there any questions on any of the minutes? Please identify before really telling me which pages they are. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you, councillors. That's been a lovely evening. Thank you. And have a safe journey home.